Hello, everyone. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Mia. Good to see you. I'm your host, Karl, or kind of Joe Rogan from Wish, and with me today is Dr. Thomas, son of Tom, court historian. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing well. I just wish my parents had been more, imaginative when naming.
Okay, so what are we talking about today?
So, as opposed to like me telling you how the Normans did things, this is just something that especially with the sort of some of the new rules in D&D coming out and other developments in the RPG world. This just seemed like a good topic. Sort of like, what do people expect out of an RPG, and how has that changed over the years? How does it interact with other elements of popular culture? So, um, it's not about the fact that in the Middle Ages, nobody actually lived in, half timbered houses, or at least they did until the very, very end. That's easy. That's just, that's low hanging fruit. We don't worry about that. It's a fantasy world. But this is a little more about, I think, about um, where did these come from in RPG? Why has it changed the way it has? Because you can see this sort of oscillation in what games offer.
Mm-hmm.
So the good news about this is I have zero credentials. My PhD means nothing. The only thing that presumably means anything is that I've been playing them since December of 1978. So I
That's
have
after a
some
while.
some
Yeah.
personal experience. Yeah, it's way too long. Um, uh, but all of you have that experience, presumably. So, I think this is largely going to be a comment driven stream. So if you have an opinion, sure. I mean, I'll say something. If you think I'm an idiot, don't tell me I'm an idiot, but go, no, I think it's this. Because I think, it's just a fun discussion. And I can argue both ways or both sides of a question. I don't
Yeah, that sounds good. But before I forget, I did have a question for you. Did you think about the Romans today?
I'm sorry, did I what?
Did you think about the Romans today?
I have thought about the Roman Empire at least 3 times already.
Oh, well, okay.
And I'm not counting twice I thought about the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
I know it's like, well, they're not even minor league. So no, but I've thought about I've been thinking more about the Roman Republic lately, but that's okay.
Yeah,
The Empire
that
always
counts.
shows up. And remember, there's technically no such thing as the Empire for several hundred years
True.
after it.
Yep.
So there is no emperor. We just think here.
Okay,
So,
now that's cleared up. Where do you want to start the discussion?
well, let's go back to the very beginning. I mean, that's kind of the normal place to begin. So I suppose everybody knows that when D&D was inverted commas invented, um, it was a war game, or it grew out of a war game more than it grew out of anything else. And the I think we all know that today it's very different from that. The original idea was that uh, we've been playing these Kriegsspiele, these war games where we reenact Waterloo endlessly. Um, wouldn't it be great if we could do some of this, but like on an individual level? And so the chainmail rules got changed into the D&D.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, the earliest versions didn't even have any fantasy stuff, right? It was just like historical gaming.
Yeah, the earliest rules, sort of the intermediate uh, chainmail rules, weren't particularly fantastic. Um, and that's really that turn towards fantasy in the minds of the people who were developing this thing. That's really the first time that it tells you how early popular culture starts to intrude on the game,
Mhm.
right? So we're talking 73, 74, 75, and this is the point at which not the first time that anybody uh, knows about the Lord of the Rings, but the huge explosion that came from basically the late 1960s, or at
That's a,
least the next decade.
that's after the first publishing of the Two Towers, right?
Well, what it is it's the release in this country, at least, of the mass market paperbacks by
Oh,
Valentine
okay.
Books. So those were the weirdest books I've ever seen. I mean, you want to talk about artists not knowing what they were painting. If you look at the covers of those things, everything's like weird and spiky, and there's some kind of stylized. I don't know if they're supposed to be the eagles, or or the fell beasts, or just like seagull. It's impossible to tell. It's also stylized. But the when Valentine Books put out that trilogy in the late '60s, it it hit high schools basically, because I get actually I do have credentials for that, because my mother was an English teacher at the time, and she complained that she had to keep replacing her schoolroom copies of The Lord of the Rings,
Just because
because
people
they
get.
would either get destroyed by students or stolen by students, and she could not keep copies in the classroom. So she brought some of them home. So I had them until they disintegrated eventually. But that's the point at which sort of it broadened out. I mean, obviously, The Lord of the Rings had been available since the mid '50s, but now you have cheap paperbacks that are available to everybody. Technically speaking, in Southern California, you could actually just take them to the beach. So um, for a good day of surfing and Tolkien. But um, that interest in uh, in fantasy really exploded, and I think that side of popular culture is at least partially what sort of penetrated the brains of people like Gygax and Dave Arneson, and said, "Oh, look, here's a way we can sort of." Well, certainly for Gygax, the answer is monetize this.
But still,
And
I
that's
mean,
going to be another theme that I think we probably need to talk about. Is it's a game. It probably qualifies, or RPGs probably qualify as some kind of loose subculture as well. But let's not forget that an awful lot of it is about making.
about making, sorry, it cut
And
off there.
that an awful lot of the history and why things go the way they do is because people want to make money off of it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So one
So,
second.
you have to pander to your consumers, right?
Yeah, for sure. So
You
one second, Tom. I see that
Sure.
Chris and Lisa have joined us. Hi, guys. Good to see you. And a question about it, because even if fantasy as a genre was pretty loose, I think it was lumped together with science fiction at the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, stuff like Conan had been around since the was it 20s?
Yes. Yeah.
So
1926 is the first Conan story.
wouldn't it be a better starting point, or didn't it affect the role-playing scene so much?
Well, I mean, I suppose the problem was it was so hard to play back then because you didn't have modern communications. You didn't have population density. You didn't. I mean, I remember growing up, and it was so like in the '70s. Um, I think anybody like I'll listen to Matt Colville sort of talk about his days starting to play in the '70s and early '80s, and it's like it was hard to get a group together. So, I mean, to some degree, the success of a game depends on the number of people who are not just willing but also able to play it.
So that's probably why it took off in colleges and stuff like that, yeah?
Exactly. You have a bunch of people with the right age gathered together in one place. And in fact, my first year in college, I played probably 5 games a week, pulled a couple of all nighters doing it. Different kinds of games, D&D, Traveler, whatever.
Okay.
But it was really easy because basically I had 3 neighbors and they were all DMs. So it was sort of a golden age kind of thing. But um, but yeah, I mean, it depends on things like that. You got to have people to play the game, and even though you don't need a massive number of people to play the game, there's also elements like, uh, who's got the money to buy the books,
Yeah, that's a good, important point.
who,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and that's, let's face it, early on, that was one of the great advantages of D&D is it's all up here, or a lot of it is up here, and especially if you're a college student or a high school student, what do you have access to? Well, you've got the kitchen table, you've got paper, and you've got a pencil. So if you could afford a book, you were ready to go. And I think that was huge in terms of what you could do. Because, and I know I've heard Chris Perkins talk about this too, that like he only had one book when he started, and I think it was a monster manual. So they had to deduce the game from the monster manual.
Yeah,
which sounds fun in a way,
I think
but
I remember that Professor Dungeon Master had also mentioned that he had kind of reverse engineered the game from,
mhm,
I want to say, Keep on the Borderlands.
probably,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I remember playing that very, very early on, and um, anytime you started, you had no idea what was going on, and the poor DM was, of course, totally at sea. They had no idea of how anything worked. Um, but I think that was a key to the early success. But what was the other thing that kids were doing besides drugs? Although maybe that ties in too, in the 1970s, is they were fantasy and science fiction were very big, um, and and there was in fact this turn towards mass market paperbacks as something that you could get. They were cheap. Never underestimate the power of cheapness. Um, and so if you were a high school or a college student, you finally really had access to this. I mean, you could 50 years earlier have bought a copy of Weird Tales and you would have the raw material. You would have Lovecraft, you would have Howard, you would have Clark Ashton Smith, but you wouldn't have a game and you'd have no idea how to build it because one had ever been built.
I get you.
So yeah, so really, I think what Gygax brought to it was that link that said, look, no, we can put this in a structure. We can put this in a set of gaming rules. So that at least made the development of RPGs possible.
Okay. And that's when bits and pieces of different fantasy settings started getting pulled into the thing. I mean, I know that they literally copied and pasted hobbits right into the game because then the Tolkien estate asked them, "Hey, could you not do that, please?"
Yeah, I mean, and I think once they realized that that was a way to broaden the appeal, um, uh, they didn't really have a formula. It was just sort of like grab stuff and hopefully this will work. And if you know what happened to TSR later, and I suppose we'll talk about it, there was really no grand plan at the beginning. It was, guys working out of basements kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, of course, I guess you could say the same thing about Apple, but there was a lot of sort of, yeah, just incorporating things willy nilly. And if you if you look at the differences between like the original rules and then very quickly within a year, they're getting feedback from people playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
So they're already listening to sort of the fans. So which is why the thief was invented, for example. There's no thief, but the thief is invented because people are like, I want a specialized character to go through dungeons, you know? And that's what the thief is. If you look at the thief, especially the old rules, not now, but if you look at the old rules, the thief is given everything that you can give him to make him the character in the dungeon, including just weird things like he's the only guy who can climb walls. He's the only guy who can hear noises.
The only guy who can find
It's very
traps, which is
strange.
super important.
Yeah, yeah, it's very odd. But I mean, they were, again. I don't think they really knew what they were doing in that sense because again, nobody had done this before. Nobody had tried to to combine fantasy and wargaming. And as time got on, of course, it got away from them, and we went more and more into. But they were responding to their audience, as anybody who wants to make money has to.
Yeah. And thinking about it, I mean, if you look at I think the closest British equivalent would be Games Workshop, where they've also pulled a whole bunch
Mhm.
of let's call it inspiration from different sources and jumbled it together into a separate setting. Although,
Mhm.
I mean, they did have, I think, 10 or 20 years advantage on seeing what TSR was doing at the time. But I think they were
Right.
a lot more careful about it, rather than just, yeah, just copy paste this and copy paste this and copy paste this.
Right. Yeah. Don't. You got to learn from what your competitors are doing, whether it's right or wrong. You know. Um, so I think it's interesting. There's also, I think, as always with something like this, there's a certain amount of serendipity that's involved as well. Um, so in in D&D, but also in Tolkien. Well, no, not Tolkien. We'll leave Tolkien aside. In D&D, at the beginning and through most of its history, there's a very clear line between who the elves are and who the dwarves are.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost define them by what they do. What's their primary goal?
Okay.
You know, where's their expertise? And elves are magicy.
Ooh.
Dwarves are crafty. So is that something that they developed in the game? No, that's actually something that has probably been around since around 1500. Okay, that division. But originally, and Tolkien knew this, the elves and the dwarves are basically the same.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at
So
most fairy tales or folk tales or whatever, they're just different words for each other. Sometimes even goblin is interchangeable with that.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah. So if you go back and look at Germanic legend, there's functionally no difference between the elves and the dwarves. And it really isn't until later, and it gets reinforced in Tolkien, although with one important distinction. So again, there are physical distinctions that Tolkien sticks in, which we are still sticking with, right? But at the same time, if you think about it, who are the really great craftsmen in the in Tolkien's work? And the answer is the elves. It's not the dwarves. The dwarves are
Agreed.
good. Don't get me wrong. They build all sorts of great stuff. But if you want a kick-ass artifact, you go to the elves.
Yeah. And
Okay.
one thing I wanted to bring up before we go much further is the way that elves are depicted and how that changes over time. Because I think starting off with most of the day, they're depicted as these really wispy, skinny people, right? So if we
Mm-hmm.
take an example from the third edition Player's Handbook, that's an elf. Okay. But if we go back, for example, to let's see, yeah, 1978 Lord of the Rings calendar from the Hildebrand brothers. Okay, that's supposed to be Legolas over there, and good God, the man lifts. I mean, look at his hands.
Yeah, it's like his hands. It's like the hands of Orlac. Somehow he's managed to get a weightlifter's hands.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also, again, you mentioned craftsmen and so on. Same thing
yeah,
here, and yeah, this guy is a blacksmith. I mean, he's got those big chunky arms.
yeah. And he's not a dwarf.
Yeah,
He is, as you said. I think it was Celebrimbor.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
Tolkien clearly knew what he was doing. Let's put it this way. But over the centuries, that distinction between elves and dwarves developed further. And if any of you have seen this, and I recommend it, although it's very, it lasts a while. If you ever want to see Fritz Lang's um, uh, his Nibelungen
hmm,
films, um, the dwarves that actually forge stuff in there are not just dwarves. I mean, they're like gnarled and hunchbacked and all of that. And there's this very clear distinction being made between, the incredibly physically attractive elves and the not so physically attractive dwarves. Um, and you know, that's not really the way it was originally. Um, but the good thing about it is, boy, does that work well in an RPG.
Yeah, I mean, you want
Because
distinctions, yeah?
now you can split the races and they do what they do.
They're distinct packages, and you can pick them up, and then you can do different things with them.
Yeah, yeah. So just the fact that over the years, and again, Tolkien had nothing to do with it per se, and and neither did the guys who worked on D&D in the early days. That was just a sort of a trope that had developed over the last 400 years. They took advantage of it, but originally it was, again, no difference between elves. I don't know, just a weird thing. It popular culture means popular culture now, not popular culture 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. So I see that Dungeon Maiden is asking, was Conan is a terrain crafter? Yeah, I believe he is. I think he turns people into terrain.
Yeah. Well, yes. And he also rearranges rooms and buildings and nations, yeah, things like that.
Okay, so have you ever seen Keely from The Hobbit? That is one hot dwarf. Yeah, I mean, they did try to subvert that a bit with the Hobbit movie, although, again, the Hobbit movies were like cultural plague, in my opinion. It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I apologize for MGM's involvement. We didn't make it, but I apologize. You can blame Peter Jackson for that. I know we'll talk about him later, but yeah, it's an interesting thing because if you put most of the dwarves up against, take, I don't know, Bomber, for example, and put
mhm.
them up next to Keeley, you'd go different species.
Yeah,
Not a chance, not a chance. So very strange. Yes, you want to. You can pander to popular culture a bit too much. You know, um, I think that was sort of a reaction to the, oh look, Legolas is a hot elf in the first trilogy. Now it's time for the dwarves to have a hot elf, or to have a hot dwarf.
yeah. I mean,
Equal time for dwarves.
I think it might not have been that's that much of a problem if the others hadn't been made to look like crap, basically. I mean, because
Yeah,
you've got Thorin, who's looking very dignified, and he's pretty chunky and everything, so yeah, very dwarfy, but very dignified.
right.
And apart from Keely and Philly, they're just made to look like idiots with the funny hats and hairdos and whatever.
Yeah, I don't know, by the way, how much time they spent on their hair in the morning, but
I think it's a lot.
how did they have time? How did they have time for adventuring? That's my question.
Yeah, I think they just use the secret dwarf goat grease, and they just grease it once, and then it's good for once.
That's, that's it. It's actually set. There's actually hair cement. But it kind of brings up an interesting thing, and I guess I yeah, why not? Let's talk about this. Let's one of the central tensions in RPGs, and I'm going to use D&D because we have
Mhm.
most history, is that there is a a, a constantly changing tension between the environment and what you want to do in it. And
Okay,
to a certain degree,
what does
that's
that mean?
true. I mean, most RPGs are about, really, if you take it down to their bare essentials, about overcoming obstacles of whatever kind. Okay, that's the whole adventuring idea. So why is Gygax the cat? Oh, well, I know why Gygax. Um, So the problem is not a problem. It's something that every DM, especially I think, wrestles with. Is most people want to be Howard type characters,
Mm-hmm.
but adventuring in a Tolkien type world.
I thought you were going to say something like everyone wants to be Conan, but they end up like Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Well, that's probably true too. Um, I've played in games where the Bridge of Death and various other things actually appeared. So um, it's but it's kind of a problem for DMs who have enough to do as it is, right? But the idea is that that because of the way popular culture works, because we're presented in things like in literature like Tolkien, in movies like Peter Jackson stuff, we're presented with a sort of a finished in the sense of finely crafted and polished vision of a fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
You know that if you ever watch the extras on the Lord of the Rings, you'll just freak out over like somebody spent 3 years of their life doing nothing except crafting mail, and then you realize, oh wait, there were medieval smiths who spent their entire lives doing it. But at the same time, uh, movies don't usually work like that. Usually, it's as quick and cheap as you can get it. Um, but the 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 issue is that as a consumer, you
Mm-hmm.
are presented with these polished products.
Yeah.
And then you have a game that says, we will give you the opportunity to move around in that kind of world. And this is true, but this is, I mean, one of the, well, it's true for almost every one of these games. So like if you were playing Vampire the Masquerade, you probably read Anne Rice. And Anne Rice had this, very full, rich, almost Victorian Gothic world.
Yeah.
And so you wanted to move around in it.
With societies
But the
and everything.
problem,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the problem is, and actually Vampire the Masquerade is a pretty good game, but the problem is that there's always going to be this tension between what how players play and their expectations about how it's going to go. And that can be, that's dependent on a couple of things. One is, of course, the GM, right? But one is also the depth of the world. And the great disservice that Tolkien did from Beyond the Grave was to present a fantasy world that had multiple languages that worked as languages, histories going back thousands and thousands of years, tales of heroes, uh, great evil, and the whole bit. And so by the time that, let's say in the early 80s, that TSR started to really react to their audience, they found themselves in a situation where people were demanding that kind of environment.
Yeah. Actually,
And
Tom, that brings me to a point that Lisa mentioned over here. I'd like to bring that up because I think it fits perfectly. And by the way, hi Eric and Campaign Terrain, good to see you. Now, where did that go? Here. So, if the dwarf and the elf chick had a child, would it be an elf?
Elworf, yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I remember
yeah.
that at some point the DSR had done like this. Okay, so if it's an elf and a dwarf, then it's this kind of race with these stats, and if it's this and that, and they've got these other different stats.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's just it gets very weird because of course consumers will demand anything that they want. It can't always be delivered to them. But yes, this is sort of the problem with half elves and half orcs, is that for decades people pretended that like that was a thing. It's not a thing. There's no such thing as 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 a half elf civilization or culture, or a half orc one, basically you go and live with one of your parents, or you're not allowed to be in either culture. But there's no real. It's not a group. It's a bunch of individuals. You know, so yeah, the Keely and the elf chick. You know, as far as I know, at least in Tolkien, there's no instances of dwarves interbreeding with elves. I mean, I can't think of anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, they're definitely, even in the cases where you have half elves, they have to pick one side at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just like Elrond and Elros had to pick were they more going to be mortal or immortal. You know, you can't sit on the fence. That doesn't work. Um, but the other thing, of course, is that elves and dwarves were created by different entities. So you know, probably their DNA. We don't even know if they have DNA. You know, who knows what they've got? They may have a squirrel running around in a wheel in a cage. I don't know.
Oh,
But
okay,
it probably isn't the same thing.
okay.
You
That's my
know.
new headcanon now.
um, but the problem became that players were like, no, I want to play in Tolkien's world, for example, because that was obviously the prime thing. And poor GMs, it's like, wait a minute, I have not been a professor of historical linguistics at Oxford for 50 years. How the hell do I create that world? You know, what do I do? How in depth do I go? So that has, I think, has always been a problem, and it is largely, or it's one of the main factors in why TSR failed, is that they kept trying to create these campaign settings, and I don't even know how many they eventually created, but you can just start naming them. You know, you got Greyhawk, you got Spelljammer,
Mhm.
you got Zakara. You know, there's a million of them. Dark Sun, you know, whatever. And the problem was that every time that they did that, they chopped their audience up. Whereas before you were a D&D fan, now you are a fan of a setting. And you're not, if you're playing in Dark Sun, you're not buying a Spelljammer product.
But at the same time, you have to, as a company, they would have to split up their investments and getting a
Absolutely. You
smaller
got to
return.
keep
Yeah.
printing more material for Dark Sun and Spelljammer and whatever, but nobody is buying all of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, to a large degree, it's not the only problem, obviously, but that's a you know, that's a real problem from the business point of view, and it's no surprise that by the end of the '80s, TSR was in terrible financial. You know, they just made terrible business decisions. Um, but on the other hand, I mean, I played probably in about 3 or 4 of those, and they were fun. But again, they just showed the basic problem of, look, I have to have a box set that contains not only a highly detailed map, but as they used, you know, the big one for Greyhawk, it was a gazetteer that had details of every single um, nation on the map. You know, what its primary racial composition, its religious orientation, you know, who was the leader, what was his class, what was his level. You know, I mean, it went nuts,
Yeah,
right?
to be honest, I never understood why they did that, because it's like, why are you putting so much detail in this? It's like, do I really care how many shoemakers are in the city?
Yes, yeah. I mean, exactly. Or rat catchers.
Yeah.
You know, um, so they ended up shooting themselves in the foot, and they paid the price for it. But at the same time, they're not doing that prescriptively. They're doing that in response to people writing in and going, "Hey, TSR, I'd really like to adventure in a place. You know, I want you to do more with that Oriental Adventures book." And so you end up with Zakara
Hmm.
as a campaign setting. Um, you know, because you know some people are going to buy it, um, but not enough. And in the meantime, you're just plowing money into these things. Um, so responding responding to consumer demand isn't always a good thing, or at least you got to be really careful about the way you do it.
Yeah, especially
Because
with especially with 1980s warehousing and freight. I mean, it's not like today you can
yeah,
just sell PDFs or whatever.
exactly. Yeah, it was the overhead was incredible, you know. And some of the descriptions of what it was like inside TSR, you're like, oh, this is bad. This is
All right.
really, really bad. A toxic workplace environment that also probably um, broke every health and safety rule that there was. Um, plus infighting between the owners, etc.
Yeah, that never hurts.
So, just reading some of this.
So I see that Grimwood Games joined us. Hey there. Okay, and Chris is saying TSR made terrible business decisions towards the 80s, but they made some admirable creative ones, bringing games like Top Secret, Bohill, Gamma World, and Star Frontiers to market. I'll be honest, I think that's one of the things we see very often is that as companies grow larger, they become less creative because you can still have the creative talent and the creative energy, but at some point you have to answer to shareholders. Once you cross that line, then you have to focus on a limited thing.
Yeah, and things like I love Boot Hill. Boot Hill was great, and I played Gamma World as well. And yeah, you're right. They because the initial success of D&D enabled them to do other games, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem ultimately was that in D&D lay their advantages and their disadvantages, and it was such a huge proportion of their business that when it started to go bad, it was going to drag everything else down. And that's essentially, what happened. So yeah, haven't played Boot Hill in 35 years probably, but I would play it again. I have good memories of it, and uh, the thing is, especially in a business environment, the babies get thrown out with the bathwater
Okay.
when a company folds.
Speaking of babies, I see a discussion in the chat about what you would get if you cross an ant with a hobbit. See some good suggestions there.
Well, probably a dead hobbit would be the answer.
Yeah, or at least a very sore one. Yeah.
Yes, but then you could. I mean, if you remember, the hobbits were really big on genealogy, so they'd probably be into the whole idea of a family tree.
Oh, good. Right.
So anyway, it is responding to consumers like that is going to kill you every time if you don't think about it carefully. And it's pretty clear that people like just didn't, in a sense, have the experience. And again, this and Games Designer Workshop were like the two big publishers at this point. There wasn't a whole lot of places to look to for solutions, and that's always a problem. If you can't steal from your competitors, you're not doing it right. So the result was TSR went down. And I guess in a sense, you can argue that was a good thing because it meant that they went back, that ultimately the reorganized TSR went back to their core product, which was D&D. And not only that, but a very slimmed down D&D.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they started. So you're not talking about a million, campaign settings.
Yeah, in fact,
So
I
what you
noticed
ended
that
up
in
with,
the most recent editions, I think since the third, they've been saying, okay, this setting is going to be the official setting for this edition. We may release some books, but mostly we're going to focus on this one. But
yeah, I think when they did fifth edition, they looked at that and went, oh yeah, we better learn from that.
so we have a
You know,
question from Eric Clements here. So what would be the alternative to not using one of the pre-made campaigns?
yeah, I mean, I guess the answer is don't worry about it. you know, um, my idea has always been DM what you know,
Mhm.
because I don't like using modules, much less campaigns, because there's no intrinsic link to it. It's sort of more like doing a book report. Somebody else wrote it. It's somebody else's idea. Now you have to learn it and digest it and spit it back out. And so I don't find that to be creative enough, or it doesn't satisfy the side of me that likes creativity. Yeah, you can modify it, sure, but it's still a derivative work based on somebody else's work. And if I mean, I'm a historian, so whatever I do is going to have a lot of history in it. But if my wife DMs, it's not going to have a lot of history in it. And I think that's one of the beauties of DMing is, unless you can find a campaign um, or a module that really speaks to you, as opposed to um, simply fulfilling a purpose. Like, I've got this gap and I want to fill it in. I don't feel drawn to it. So, as a ridiculous example, you know, uh, as a shout out to Eric, we played a 2-year campaign in Zakara. Enjoyed the setting very much, and had great characters that we still reference all the time. But I guarantee you that a DM who was from the Middle East would run that game a whole lot differently.
I was going to mention something else because let's put this way. I think for most of the early years I got started, I was mostly, I would say 99.9 running homebrew stuff because I just couldn't get the books down here. But
Mm-hmm.
once I did get,
Or again, if you were a high school student or a junior high, you
yeah,
couldn't afford them.
yeah, good point.
You couldn't afford the material. Yeah.
But one thing I could tell, once I got to read the Forgotten Realms, for example, I love it. It's an amazing setting. Yeah, it's super
Mm-hmm.
detailed, but good God, it's so American.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and this is a real problem. Is if for you to feel comfortable with your material, you probably have to create it yourself.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to end up trying to memorize not what happens in the module,
But the
and
connections
not just,
between the background stuff.
well,
Yeah.
and here's a guy, he's doing something. Okay, now I know what he does. His name has no meaning for me. His name is a reasonably plausible name made up of the right number of consonants and
Syllables, yeah.
vowels. But at the same time, it's not a real name. It's not anything you're familiar with. So even the names end up being something you have to memorize. So that you're putting a whole lot of pressure on yourself as a GM, because now you're essentially, swallowing an encyclopedia.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I appreciated, for example, both The Song of Ice and Fire and The Wheel of Time, because yes, it's fantasy, but they have pronounceable names. Yes, this guy's name is
Yes.
Arthur. I can remember that.
No, I mean, and if you look at Tolkien, I mean, admittedly, for a Western European audience, Tolkien works fine because, again, professor of philology, um, his names make sense.
Yeah, they're not common names, but
Uh,
they do make sense. Yeah.
yes, they make
The
sense. There
sounds kind
aren't
of go
any,
together.
like,
Yeah.
yes, there are no silent letters. Um, he's happily, he's happy. People are named things like Sam, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
But even the longer names make sense.
Yeah, but
So even, I mean, Aragorn has 3 syllables. It still
well,
makes
yeah,
sense, and there's
they
nothing
go
weird
together well.
about it.
The sounds go together in a way that makes sense.
Exactly, exactly. But at the same time, if that wouldn't be true if your first language was Hindi and you were reading Tolkien.
Good point.
You'd
But
be like, "This is totally unfamiliar to me."
yeah, but then
Actually,
again,
that's
let's
a terrible example, because in India, English is largely the language
fair
of
enough.
education.
But
But it
let's say, I don't know.
doesn't matter. Somewhere where English is not normally spoken.
Okay,
You know.
fair enough.
Um, so so yeah, that I think that's one of the reasons I don't like well, there's multiple reasons, but why I don't like massively detailed campaign settings or even modules is, good God, do I have to memorize all of this? And it's not even presented, or it's not even constructed in a way linguistically that gives you any breaks in memorizing it. You know,
well, now that you mentioned it, I think I've seen a lot of people explain the new DM trap, the new game master trap, where it's like, okay, before
mm-hmm,
we start playing, I have to do my whole world with all the languages and the history and the people, and
mm-hmm,
it is kind of a trap that I've seen happen because you start just world building can be a hobby on its own.
absolutely. And I've read some of the world building stuff. I mean, like, again, like World Anvil,
Hmm.
and it's like, wow, that's incredible. You can even write a novel, and that tells me that it's not. This is going to sound horrible. That tells me it's not for gamers, because that's one of the worst problems that you can fall into as a DM is saying you are characters in my novel. It takes
Pretty much,
away
yeah.
agency. So if you're using the same software to build your world and write a novel, you're mushing together two things that aren't the same. They are apples and oranges.
So let me catch up on Chris's comment here. The difference with adventure content published during the TSR era is that the concept of the dungeon module was adhered to. There were ready-made settings, but individual adventures stood alone, and could be slotted into a dungeon master's homebrew world with ease and seamlessness. Even when TSR published epic first edition campaigns such as the GDQ series, it was still able to be broken up and repurposed into non-Greyhawk campaigns. Hmm.
I mean, yeah, and that was, look, again, for those of us who started back in the days when you did Adventure into the Unknown, which is about as generic of a module title as you'll ever get. That was fun. It wasn't really linked to anything else. I know that when the Greyhawk Gazetteer came out, it would tell you what hex on the map these things took place in. The GD and Q series. You'd be like, oh, that's an H4, and you'd go and look at H4. There's nothing on the map. It's just a map.
Why would we
You
go?
know.
Why would we go to H4?
Yeah, I have no idea why I'm there. Um, but I really enjoyed all of those modules because, and I think BGD is right. You could pull back with those. It wasn't like you were committed to the Zakara campaign. You know, you could just pull one out and do that. And like I loved the U series that came out of the UK, which started with Secrets of Saltmarsh.
Hmm.
I have probably played U1 6 times.
Okay.
I have played U2 once, and I've never played U3 because you don't have to. It was fine, and in fact, I did exactly what BGD is suggesting. I pulled U1 out and put it in my own homebrew campaign.
Yeah, I think I'll be honest. I don't think I've ever played any modules as written, but I did literally just take them apart and put them together in this kind of weird Franken module, which taking stuff from different sources.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're meant to be generic, especially the early ones, before they really develop the idea of a campaign setting. But once you get into the campaign setting era of certainly the mid '80s, it's harder and harder to pull the material out because they're linking it and linking it and linking it, and that's problematic. You know.
So going back to what you mentioned earlier about expectations and what because at the end of the day, like we were saying before the stream, it's like there's no way to play the game wrong. You're only messing it up if people at the table are not having fun. But
Mm-hmm.
then how much fun they have it depends on expectation and what they
Mm-hmm.
want to get out of the game. So I was wondering if people in the chat want to throw out what kind of characters they enjoy playing. So Tom, would you like to go first?
Traditionally, I love playing a rogue,
Okay, why is
and
that?
yeah, my best character of all, and I say best sort of in a weird way. I have a character that is probably, I don't know, how old would Ivar be? probably 40. I've probably been playing him for 40 years. He is not a powerful character. It's all about force of personality with him. But he is legendary enough that when he shows up for a guest appearance in one of my son's games, they freak out.
Okay.
Because they've told their friends, don't mess with Ivar. And so he shows up, and I have teens and 20-year-olds like waking in their boots going, oh my God, it's Ivar. What's he going to do to us? And the answer is nothing. He's a 5th level thief. He has no magic weapons or anything. But he started as a henchman in 2nd edition,
right.
And just ended up developing somehow a fearsome reputation. And I have no idea how. But that's the sort of weird thing that happens over 40 years of playing a character.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I think, let me see. I think when I started out, I used to play Rangers mostly because I'm rather antisocial. And I love the idea of, just, nope, solid, I'm going to live in the woods for 30 years and never see anyone again. I think I'm playing rogues more often these days. Simply because I think they're just more versatile than most other characters. They don't tend to be pigeonholed into any one particular block.
Yeah, and I think again that was one of the complaints. We'll probably talk about this at some point, but one of the reasons that TSR went from thief to rogue was that there were complaints that the very thing that created the thief in the first place, i.e., he is an expert dungeon delver, meant that in broader games, as opposed to specific modules, he had nothing to do. So you needed to broaden it. I mean, they probably over broadened it by then for a while, having the bard as a subclass, But the whole point now is that no, you can do anything you want. The rogue can go anywhere and do anything. But it took him 30 years to get to that.
Okay, so let's see. Grimwood Games is saying heroes. I like being the main character of the story. Don't care about class. I like doing crazy stuff and having it work, which is fair, yeah.
Well, and again, that's one of the issues about being the main character of the story. And the simple fact is that probably all of us are playing because we want to be the main character in the story. We're all egotists to some degree. But your class, and I think that's the other thing you point out there, is your class sometimes means that depending on the adventure or the setting or the DM, you sometimes can't be the main character. And there is a subtle competition. And those of you who have sat around a table and had to shout to make yourself heard know this. There is a competition going on as to, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. That's why one of the toughest things to get done at a gaming table is to have all of your players work together because they don't want to.
Okay, so let's see. Mia saying, I tend to play clerics more often than not.
I played cleric for a while and I enjoyed it. One of my favorite characters, the one in Zakara, was a cleric, and I loved him. I thought he was a great character. My first character actually was a cleric. He lasted one adventure, at the end of which I killed my uncle's character, and in the second adventure, I was killed by a kobold.
Oh no!
And that was it. I didn't play another cleric for quite some time.
Remind me, I think there were some statistics published last year, the year before, but I think cleric was one of the classes that people choose less often.
Interesting. I liked clerics.
I might be mistaken, but I think it was something like that.
Because you could be aggressive with the cleric, but you could also be supportive with the cleric. So, he had sort of both sides going on, and I like that. I thought that was good.
Yeah,
a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, but I think what happens is that most people kind of pigeonhole it into the support role. So everyone wants to be the main character. No one wants to be the support.
Yeah. Well, again, if anybody saw my cleric when we were playing our Zakara campaign, they would go, support? No, this guy was like, well, he was like to pull in somebody who I think I mentioned in the Norman thing, but you would know him, Bishop Odo.
Yeah.
He was Bishop Odo. You know, he was not he was not standing at the back healing people. He was standing at the front
Unhealing people.
making people get healed.
Okay, so BGT is saying for about the first 30 years of my 46-year gaming campaign. Whoa, that's a long time.
Yeah.
I played human fighters in medieval fantasy games for the relatability. As I have gotten older, smarter, and meaner, I play goblin mages.
Yeah, I played a lot of fighters too, for exactly that reason. They're relatable. You can do again for all that we're doing this in fantasy. You can slip into the fighter role. Most people can. Certainly, most guys can. You can slip into the fighter role more easily than anything else, unless you're a career criminal, in which case,
Yeah,
you know.
but yeah, I mean, with mages, especially, the kind of super intelligent mages, I'm like, how do I pretend to be a smart person? Help.
Well, again, how many people? Let me. And actually, this is a good question for chat. We have all these races, or what? They've renamed them again now. Can't remember what they're called.
Species, I think. Yeah.
Is it species? Whatever. We have all of them. Does anybody actually play an elf like they're an elf? I mean, like they're not human, or a dwarf, or a halfling. It's very hard to do that.
Beyond just putting
To
on a
really be
Scottish
an
accent, for example.
yeah, yeah. It's very. We all end up playing humans at some point.
Yeah, fair enough. Because I mean, look, if you take someone, it's very difficult, especially with elves, for example. You've got a lifespan of what 900 years, and at 120, you're barely considered a teenager. I mean, I don't think any of us can process that amount of experience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's that, the funny one of the funniest ones that I you can't really say anything about it because you don't want to get ridiculous. But think of all the short races,
Yeah,
the gnomes and the halflings and even the dwarves. Realize they have a completely different perspective on the physical environment.
yeah. I mean, for starters, everyone else looks like us.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of interesting. You go ahead and do this, and this was it. Of course, originally races were classes, right? And then they got away from that immediately. But the idea was that originally that no, it's completely different. They were, there were limits to how many levels they could get. Some of them couldn't be certain classes at all. There were a lot of limitations placed on you because of your race origin. Um,
I see that Eric's comment about halflings and gnomes. A lot of looking up at nose hairs.
yeah, no, it's think about it. You're a gnome. Think of think of the scene in the Lord of the Rings, in the Prancing Pony in Bree, where there's all these halflings running around, and they're finding it hard to get the barman to see them. So even the most prosaic thing, I just want to get a drink of ale, is more difficult because the environment's not built for them. But and I've certainly never done it where I was like, I didn't try to keep track when I was DMing. I didn't try to keep track of like the hobbits see that, but the chances are pretty good. No, if there's a table in the way, they can't see you.
Yeah, good point. And especially, I mean, like thinking about it, if a trap which is meant to stop a human, say a pit or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah, I mean,
mm-hmm.
that's going to be a much more formidable if you're 4 feet tall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because like the background feature that they're now expanding even more.
Hmm.
When we were playing in 2E, the idea that we had a background was just nuts. We were all just adventurers going out to kill things and get stuff. And and the idea that you had a specific background and that it gave you additional abilities never crossed our mind. But now, of course, you're getting people choosing backgrounds not because it's their background, but because it gives them additional abilities. So, power gamers are debating, wow, this background is better than that one because I get a plus to this, and blah blah blah, whatever. But if you're in a power gamer game, that's it.
Yeah, I mean that's fair at this point. I
That's
mean,
the way you're having fun.
I think that was the way I was playing Baldur's Gate 3 on the PC, but I don't think it's something that I would do at a table. It's like, yeah, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this background is more useful. I'm going to pick that, but uh,
Well, you're basically forced to do it in Baldur's Gate. So
pretty much, yeah.
yeah.
So let's see. Chris is saying the very thoughtful YouTube channel Baking Gaming recently presented an interesting discussion on exactly the challenge of playing non-humans in game as a human in real life. Okay, I think
Good.
I
I'm
should look
gonna
it up. It
I'm
sounds
gonna
very interesting.
write that down.
Baking Gaming. I like the name of the channel.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very difficult thing to do, but that actually leads into something else that I think is really, really important. So, we talked about the problem of having this incredibly detailed environment that everybody wants to adventure in, right? Puts pressure on the DM. It actually puts pressure on the players as well. But ultimately, skipping forward a couple of decades, that was obviously driven home by the Lord of the Rings movies and even the Hobbit movies, even though everybody basically puts the Hobbit movies on a par with the Star Wars prequels. Because but it was there. Anytime you get a visual that's there, it reinforces your vision of something.
Yeah,
So,
and if you, one second, because I wanted to bring this up because basically, if we say Aragorn, for example, anyone who's ever seen the movies will think this guy. Yeah?
yeah.
But if you go back over time, the image just change significantly. For example, if you go again to the Lord of the Rings calendar, that's Aragorn.
Yeah, that's sort of very high medieval.
Kind of thing, yeah.
Or not high medieval, late medieval,
but very
fairy tale.
Robin Hood illustration style kind of thing.
Yeah.
And again with the fancy mustache. But if we go a bit further, then we've got the Rankin Boss movie Aragorn, and yeah. So I'm guessing for a span of at least 5 years, that was the mental picture people got.
That's so horrible. It's just so bad. Yeah, I mean, and again, the funny thing is okay. Remember who Aragorn is, and this is again where we have this high fantasy and low fantasy are defined in different ways by different people. So I'm just going to say high fantasy versus low fantasy.
Okay.
The hero, the hero of Aragorn is a hero, no question about it. Who is he? He is a man of ancient lineage with apparently certain powers. He certainly has an extended lifespan. He hobnobs with not mythical, but mythological beings. He is special, right? So contrast that. So that's high fantasy, right? He goes on a quest. The funny part, of course, is that he's not the one who fulfills the quest.
Yeah.
The quest is actually fulfilled by a nobody, right?
Yeah.
The hobbits are nobodies. That's the whole point. But not only that, if you look back in the literature before before Tolkien, or at least before the publication of The Lord of the Rings, you get to Howard type character. So you get to Conan, right? Now, if you build a fighter, that's, you could argue that's the barbarian, but a fighter and a barbarian are traditionally sort of been kind of the same thing.
Tomatoes.
Yeah, exactly. So the funny thing is that most people play a fighter, or certainly a barbarian, like Conan, not like Aragorn. They're they're not playing a high fantasy character. So again, you have this sort of problem of a high fantasy background,
Mm-hmm.
which if you've read Tolkien, you know nobody does magic in Tolkien. It's just kind of there. Presumably somebody
Yeah,
did
it's
magic.
very, very, very subtle.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you've got is artifacts that were magic, that were created, and at the moment of their creation, some kind of magic was infused into them. But
I mean, you do
so
get some,
it,
you do get a couple of effects that you could call spells, but if you consider all the wizards are like supernatural beings from a different place, so I don't think that really counts.
yeah, certainly there's no human.
Hmm.
It's either a Maiar, um, or or it's an artifact, right?
Yeah.
So if it's whether it's one of the rings or a palantir or whatever, these are things that were created, and the magic was put into them, and that's where it lives. There's no human agency involved other than like touching it, right, and releasing what's already in there. But nobody is casting spells. The only exceptions again are really people like Gandalf and um, so the magic is around you, but it's not kinetic. But boy, wouldn't that be boring if you were playing a magic user uh, that couldn't use magic? So that whole part of Tolkien had to be jettisoned because nobody wants to be a magic experiencer. They want to be a magic user.
Okay, but by the same token, couldn't they just have said, okay, no magic users? Bloop.
Well, they could have, but then what's the point of it being a fantasy thing? Because magic is, you know, Matt. The thing that makes it different is magic. It's not racial characteristics. It's not the fact that there's a half elf. It's the fact that elves are magical and they interbreed with humans. You know, um, so you have to have magic in there, or it's not fantasy. I suppose you could argue that it just becomes some kind of weird alternative history.
Okay, but if you look at Conan, for example, there's also magic in that. It's just that it's always bad and evil and stuff.
No, well, that's true. Yes, it's usually solved by somebody splitting somebody's head with a sword.
Yeah, or for example, if you look at Fritz Leiber's Lankmar, there is magic, but when it gets into the hands of the Grey Mouser, it's always, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to cast this spell and hope it works.
But yeah,
And it never
well,
does,
it's
but something always happens.
and again, oh boy, this really opens up a can of worms. Um, because so often in the way that people look at this stuff, they think that magic takes the place of technology.
Hmm.
That magic is essentially amoral, just like technology is amoral. It's really in the intent that that makes it ultimately bad or good. Um, but if you look at Fritz Leiber, for example, yeah, there's actually a fair amount of magic going on, and it kind of depends on who it is who's using it. So that's reasonable. Um, but at the same time, I mean, to go back to what they ended up with in D&D, which is Vancian magic.
Hmm.
What you'll notice is that a lot of people don't like Vancian magic, and in fact, in most of my 2E campaigns, we tossed it, or we at least modified it heavily, so that you didn't even really have spell slots. You just ended up with what we called mana points, and then you could use the mana points however
Ah,
you wanted.
excuse me. Yeah, I
You know,
think
and
that
I,
makes
and I
a
think
lot
that's
more
a
sense.
fairly I think that's a fairly common thing to do. Um, but nobody ever says get rid of magic. You have to have magic, or it's not fantasy. That just seems to be part of the.
Fair enough. But
the
rather than the spell slot system, I think the thing that bothered me most about the Fancy Magic system is that it's super reliable.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, because yeah, you could literally switch it out with technology, and it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess that's the thing. Ultimately, is if you're using magic to take the place of technology, if that's the role that magic has, then then it has to be an everyday thing. It can't be a Tolkien thing where only people from 5,000 years ago knew what they were doing. You have to be able to use it. You have to have a possibility of a first level magic user who could cast one spell a day or whatever. And not to get into it because that's huge, but the whole question of magic versus technology. There's no reason that developing magic would necessarily stop technology.
I think it will be more of a world building thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how much the DM wants to deal with.
I recall there was it was a computer game, a computer RPG called Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura that it kind of built up the setting so that technology fails to work in the presence of magic and magic fails to work in the presence of technology. So they built that up as that setting with balancing that kind of thing. So if some countries which have a lot of technology,
it's a synergy. Yeah, it's synergistic, but it's balanced. It's basically a symbiotic relationship. And that is interesting because I think that's probably very hard to pull off, but it would be a lot of fun.
Okay. Ooh, Dungeon Matron has a really good question here. How much logic can you apply to fantasy?
I mean, I think logic, you have to remember that logic depends on assumptions. All logic starts with assumption. So the trick is not logic per se, it's consistency once you've established what your assumptions are. So if your magic system relies on again, this symbiotic relationship between technology and magic, as opposed to, essentially a war between logic and or between magic and technology, you have to stick with it because that really affects not just the way you DM, but it affects, again, your players' expectations. So if you break their expectations too many times, you lose the immersion. The world is seen as not working.
I think, Brandon Sanderson has those rules of magic, which are okay. They're for novel writing, not for gaming, but they're basically based on the same principles. Like you have to have some kind of consistency and a system. Otherwise, it's just plot devices to solve problems you can't figure your way out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work in literature, and it doesn't work in games to have somebody just be able to wave their hand and things happen, right? There has to be a background to it in a way,
Yeah.
But here's an example. Like, if any of you have read the Randall Garrett's Lord Darcy series,
I have not, unfortunately.
It is really good, and essentially they take place. They're murder mysteries, they're alternate histories, and they take place in a world in which Richard the Lionhearted did not die in 1199, but went on to conquer France. And so, anyway, the Angevin Empire still exists, and it's sort of a steampunky type thing. But the point is that the principles of magic were discovered by a Catholic priest in the 13th century, I think, but they work like technology, and this goes back to, was it Asimov? I never can remember who said, anything sufficiently advanced.
Clark, Arthur C. Clarke.
Was it Clark?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, any technology that's sufficiently advanced looks like magic, and so for example, Lord Darcy, who is the chief investigator for the Duke of Normandy, what his chief sidekick is the chief forensic sorcerer, who basically is just that. He could be on CSI, but the magic that he does is related to forensics, and it is treated exactly following the scientific method. So it's certainly possible to do, but it's really tough to be consistent at it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's basically the same principles as writing a murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Because you still have to create a pattern where A follows B follows C follows D rather than haha, fooled you, it was the butler all along. Because
Right.
People feel cheated otherwise. It's like, and people like that to be able to puzzle things out that way.
Well, again, if you're doing something in a game and it has an effect, you see it, you observe the
Mhm.
effect, and the second time you do it, it doesn't have the same effect. That's not a good thing.
Or it could be
At
that
that point, you
you.
stop having fun with doing that thing.
I don't think that's the case because okay, if you do it once and it must be that, and if you do it twice, oh, something different happened. But if you do it a third time, you're starting to expect to get some expectations, and you want some consistency to be able to figure it out. Because if you get the first effect the third time, it's like, okay, what was different the second time? You get a bit
Right.
of exploration, so we don't need a straight jacket of consistency, but you have to have a big picture of consistency at least, so we can figure, add some exploration into it, have some fun. But it can't be random
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you have to have a statistically significant sample to
Yeah,
look at. Once or twice is not a significant sample. So, but yeah, you want it to work. You want it. It's the human brain. We want magic to work like physics. Is there any reason why it can't? No, not really. Not really. Um, so I was just so Dungeon Matron brought up the other elephant in the room, which is Critical Role, and Critical
hmm,
Role is not the only. There's lots of smaller elephants gathered around that one large one, but and because I know a lot of people, like I'm looking at Mia, for example. I know a lot of people have played on streams, and I'm sort of curious as to what your experience has been because we've talked about expectations. We talked about the fact that there's kind of this disjunction between playing like a Howard character in a Tolkien type world, but when you start when Critical Role became popular, and it's had obviously many other sort of conceptual spin-offs. If you were a new player and people said, "Oh, finally, a a way to introduce my friends to D&D. I have been playing for years. I have so much fun. I can't explain it to them. When I do, your eyes just glaze over. Here, let's just watch a bit of Critical Role." So you sit down and you watch, and they go, "Wow, that does look like fun." You're like, mission accomplished, right? But what you don't realize is that you just created more unreasonable expectations on their part. Partially because if you have a really good DM like Matt Mercer or Matt Colville, or there's others as well. Um, that's what they expect out of their DM. People who have real command of the environment and the rules. And then you've now added onto that the fact that you expect to be playing with people who are professional actors
and voice actors to it to that because
and voice
yeah,
actors. Yeah. But the point is, they know what they're doing. And in spite of their, in my mind, somewhat strange propensity to decide that, like actors, they need to go front stage and have a 10-minute soliloquy during some of these streams. Um, if you're new to the game, not only are you probably not going to play like them, but probably the other people in the game are not going to play like them. So now your expectations are kick-ass GM, kick-ass players, going to be seamless because that's what I see. You know, and that I think is a problem. It's Critical Role and its ilk both tremendously helped D&D and also created some, and
yeah. I mean, in a way, it's like
jury is still out too.
yeah. I mean, in a way, it's like gaming porn because it does create some very unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So,
yeah, I mean, I love Matt Mercer's work. Vox Machina was absolutely amazing, but yeah, and it does put kind of expectations both into players and with game masters who think that okay, all my players should behave this way. So it's on both
yeah,
sides of the table.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, that's too bad. But on the other hand, isn't the goal? I mean, on balance, I would say it was a great thing. Obviously, I mean, why would I want it to not be a good thing? Um, it did. It got lots of people into the hobby. That is not a bad thing, you know. And even if some of them go, "Oh, it's not like that at all," when I get around the table, and they don't ever play again, there are still lots of people staying, and that's a good thing. Um, but I do think that at least the one thing that Wizards has decided that I think was so key was, and you mentioned it earlier, we're gonna grab one setting and we're gonna
Mm.
stick with it. And even though they're tweaking the rules now, which of course will get us to buy more books, um, or maybe it will. I might not. Um, they are a business. They got to make money. So as a player, frankly, at this point, we all could probably not ever buy another Wizards of the Coast product and be absolutely fine.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't bought a
But
Wizard of the Coast product since 2010, I think. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we have some of the more recent stuff, but I don't think we've bought one in a while. A couple of years, whatever. And the other thing is it sort of became a default gift, right? People are like, "Oh, do you have that book? Oh, I'll give you it as a gift." So it's better than getting a paperweight or something. So, but ultimately, there was all this brouhaha about the open gaming license and everything. Uh, and ultimately, the thing is, they're only going to produce product as long as it really makes money. So,
I mean, they're a business, not a charity. So.
exactly. But again, the irony of the fact that we're talking now, and it's 50 years since the beginning of D&D, there is no shortage of D&D material out there in a
True, yeah.
variety of forms. You probably don't need to buy, especially if you do homebrew campaigns and if you modify rules as you wish. Look, by this time, there's a decent chance that half of the people in chat have more experience with D&D than the people at Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, especially with the turnover.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
I mean, so I mean,
Yes,
I'm
every
laughing.
time
It's a
they
terrible
fire
thing because they
everybody,
keep firing people. Yeah.
including the payroll department, which is what happened in 1989.
What, they fired the
You know,
payroll department?
yeah. Although, it's really weird. That is actually something that happens a lot. I know it happened. It happened at MGM in like 1990 or 91. They fired, among other things, payroll department.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a little strange. Okay, still had toilet paper, which is the most important. Um, but let's see. Boy, there's a lot of comments.
So, Dirty Basement Terrain saying Critical Role can be D&D's biggest modern blessing and curse at the same time. I think it's a net positive. I think it's a net positive. But other than that, just want to say, I mean, I'm surprised that more people don't do heavy homebrew, like lots of them, because I think that's one of my favorite things to. I possibly do more homebrew than I actually play.
Yeah, I mean, I have yet to pull the trigger on a campaign that I've been working on now for about 5 years because I keep coming up with more ideas and I tend to be a completist.
Do
Um,
it.
yeah, I need to just bite the bullet and go. But part of it is that even if you're doing, I don't want to say bare bones because that gives the wrong impression. Even if you're creating a campaign where you don't enumerate every single blade of grass, it still takes a lot of time and effort, and real life gets in your way as it does for everything. And then you also have the problem, of course, of, well, you want to be consistent, and it's sort of like Critical Role. There's an upside and a downside. The upside is you can create a world the way you want it to be, and you are familiar with it, so you feel confident that when you eventually GM it, you won't stumble over names, for example. You know where things are. You're like, oh, this is part of that plot thread. But at the same time, it becomes your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can work against you. Again, on balance, I don't think it does. On balance, it's fine. You got to take ownership. But that's why world building can be good up to a certain point. But eventually, it just sucks you in, and you end up,
Yeah, it becomes its own
again,
hobby
living
kind of
world
thing.
end. Yeah, the hobby is not the game. The hobby is building worlds.
Which is fine. I mean, if that's what you enjoy doing, go for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think, and Eric Clemens gets it, I think. I think all campaign material and extra stuff TSR puts out is great for getting the creative juices flowing and should be a springboard for your games and not the dogma. Yep. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, part of this is perception in that, they, issue a book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like Tales from the Cauldron, like that. And it's essentially a book of modules, right? That's fine. You can pull it out. You can disassemble it as you wish. But of course, the tendency, the very, human tendency is to look at it as a whole because it was presented to you as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Same thing as when you see the monsters manual and then you say, okay, every one of these has to be in one dungeon.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just one more thing that you have to sort of put brain power into, and that's really what it comes down to. You have to have time and brain power, and it's things like in monster stat blocks where they tell you this is how many hit dice it has, or you could just use the average.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter. I'll just use the average, and it's like, I don't know. I don't know that I want every orc to have 7 hit dice. But again, it's the idea of we're going to make it easier for you. We're going to give you professionally crafted stuff. You're going to pay us. But then you can do with it what you will. But the downside of being presented with that is it already exists in a coherent form. And just like things look more official if you print them.
True, yeah.
The same thing occurs when you get a book.
Okay, Tom, could I interrupt you for a second? We're going to stop for a 5-minute break and we'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that, and hold on to that, Tom. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that, people. But the problem with being well hydrated is that you're well hydrated. So, going back to your point, Tom, you were saying that once you have something in print, it has kind of this greater legitimacy kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, whether you're a GM or a player, you gotta have fun doing whatever it is you're doing, right? So if it works for you to get essentially pre-made material and then modify it, sure, why not? Or if it works for you to build from the bottom up, um, sure, why not? I think the key ultimately is okay, whatever it is that you build, the players have to have fun playing it too. So, you know, that's one thing that I guess is actually very tough for a GM is how do you get the players essentially involved in the world building, not just running through the adventure, but how do you leave enough gaps that they can actually um, contribute to the world?
Kind of thing, yeah. I mean, one of the things about the story design in Assassin's Creed, for example, the game's not the movie, uh, is that it always puts you in that kind of shadow areas in history, because it tries to stick reasonably close to actual history, but then it slides you into those gaps where, hey, we have no idea what happened. Oh, okay, this was this guy.
Yeah,
But then Dungeon Matron has another take on that, and she says that building your own world is threatened by a creative player coming in and finding within the rules methods of nuking it.
yeah, but that's great.
Yeah,
I mean, if
I
you
don't,
if you got a player that is that committed,
yeah, I don't see that
you
as a
know,
threat. I think I see that as an extension of the world building.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that,
well first of all, how are you threatened by somebody following the rules? The rule, I mean, the rules that you've agreed on, right? It's not like somebody going, you know what? I don't care what you say. I want to take a potion as a bonus action. You know, um, no, it's a full action until the new revised rules come out, at which point it becomes a bonus action. But apparently, enough people homebrewed it that way
I think
that
it was.
Wizards
I
was
think
like,
that
no, we're going to change the rule.
I think that was because of again Baldur's Gate 3, for example. That's become
Mm-hmm. Right.
it gathered enough weight on its own, surprisingly, in under layer that yeah, okay, we're going to put this into the manuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, luckily, as a GM, you can decide whether or not you want to do that.
Yeah,
You know,
but yeah,
and in fact, before we even knew that this was going to happen in one of our current campaigns, we actually had a discussion about that. Like, how long does it actually take to find the right potion, get it out of wherever it is, to uncork it, drink roughly a pint of liquid? How long does that take? Is that a free action with the environment, or free interaction with the environment, or what does it? And so again, they're responding to consumers, but in this case, as you say, probably this is a result of the popularity of Baldur's Gate.
yeah.
So it's from a video game.
But to go back to what Dungeon Matron said, I don't think that's a threat. I think that's the stuff that in-game legends are made of.
Oh yeah, the sudden like what left turns. I remember watching some Ack Inc. streams from when they were at one of the PAX games, and Mike Krahulik has done probably three where I think I was just stunned by what he did. Probably the uh, most amazing one is the one where he kissed his own clone who had become a lich, and while he was kissing him, inserted a small stone into his mouth and invoked Baldur's Tower so that a building came out of the top of his head. And I was just like, oh my god, that's the greatest thing I've ever seen. Um, and strictly speaking, I think there's a question as to whether it's within the rules, but it's certainly within the tone of the game.
Yeah, I guess it's strangely epic and specific, but yeah.
Yeah. So you don't get those moments that often. You get moments of triumph, you get moments of loss, but you don't usually get those transcendent moments where you just go, whoa. So if somebody comes up with one of them, good for them.
Okay, I see that Red Doctrine joined us. And yeah, I think Mia Geeked has a great point here. Or they go completely sideways and miss things. Oh, you don't want to go
Yep.
left. Yeah, because I mean, if you've really invested into your creation and you've designed this amazing thing and whatever, it's like you want people to find it.
Yeah, I guess that again goes back to the whole thing of don't draw the world's most detailed map. You know, um, the I the world that I'm building at the moment, I have basically stopped building because it's essentially just a map of England around the year 1000, and there aren't that many people there. There aren't that many cities. I know roughly where they are, and if they don't go into this particular swamp now, they will go into it later. I'm just going to shift it 100 miles. You know,
Okay.
but again, if you clog it up a lot, if you are that rigid, you're gonna get those problems. But that's what you get with pre-made modules.
Yeah,
You
good
know,
point.
you end up being terrified that it's some kind of conceptual Jenga. You know, where if you pull out the wrong thing, it's all going to come tumbling down. So I mean, that's inherent in it. You get good material, but you can't. There are certain things that you can't screw with.
Yeah, or you antagonize the wrong non-player character, or you murderize the wrong village, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
are you familiar with the concept of the quantum ogre?
No,
Okay, so the idea is this: you're at a fork in a tunnel, and you can go left or right. Okay, now there's an ogre waiting on the left, but as a player, you don't know that. And if you choose to go right, as a game master, I can choose. Ah, okay, no, the ogre was on the right all along.
mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that? I think it's
Well, it's kind of like it's basically Schrodinger's cat with you really wanting the cat to be dead. Um, I, you know, I guess this kind of gets back to the evolution of the game. If it was 2E and you went the wrong way, you were just stuck, right? You
Mhm.
went down that tunnel, right? And if you were a mean DM in 2, you would do exactly that. You'd move the ogre over and somebody would die, right? And you go, well, that's the way it goes. I wanted you to meet the ogre. You didn't beat him, and you failed this part of the obstacle course. But at the same time, if the idea, well, okay, so this is part of the evolution again, right? So just to sort of pick back up the 20 years that we didn't talk about at all. So TSR went down, they had overproduced product in silly ways. And the decision was basically made to go back to a much crunchier, sorry, not a crunchier, but a smaller product. And in 3 and the various 3s and 4, what you ended up with was something that really not incredibly crunchy,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you had to know stats that were absolutely ridiculous. Oh, it's +4 on this, but wait, you've done that, so that's a -2. I mean, it was like algebra.
It was
Okay,
algebra.
it pretty much was, and I paid no attention in algebra class, so I did not like certainly 3. Um, But then the pendulum swung back, and when you got to 5, it became no. We want a game that moves quicker, that's more about storytelling as opposed to crunchiness. Um, but then, of course, because 5 is now 10 years old, it has started to get crunchier again. And I suppose the irony of that is that it was originally touted as, collaborative storytelling. It'll flow better. You'll like it much better, unless of course you were somebody who liked the crunchy stuff. um, but the result is that as things have happened, like here's more options, and the funny thing about that is at some point, just because you call something an option it doesn't make it an option because you still have to consider it.
Yeah.
When you've got 3 options, okay, you can look at them and it's fine. When you have 30 options, the slog of going through those options is a level of crunchiness in and of itself.
But what really kills you in that is the interactions between them, because I remember discussing this with DM Scotty in the design of Easy D6, for example. His idea was that there are no interactions between special rules. So, for example, if you have disinclination, the inclination interacts with the basic rules and nothing else. So, if he decides to publish another thing further on, then you don't have players going through with charts with red ribbons and post-it notes going, okay, so this does this and this works with that. No, it's just basic rules and one level. End of story. I remember in 2E there was this kind of thing where players would be like, yes, so we've got these basic rules, and then we've got this book of class options, and then we've got this fighter's handbook, and then we've got this book of magic items, and then we've got again I put a stack of books that much, and then, do you expect me to read them?
Yeah, I have that. I have that stack. And I haven't gotten rid of them just because there are a few pearls in there, but mostly it's just like, oh God, not another page of options. And that frankly is the way that 5e is now going.
I think it's a natural thing. I think it just
it is because, and again, don't ever forget this is a business. They're going to have to put product out. So they're going to keep doing this. That's fine. But now we're at a point where, I mean, I literally just did this 2 weeks ago, where I was leveling up and I sat there with 4 books.
Jeez.
Trying to figure out what I was going to do. And so the pendulum is swinging even within 5e, something that its selling point was it's not as complicated, it's not as crunchy, it's really about moving along, don't spend too much time. And it's like, okay, but you guys are reaching critical mass. And that is in fact what led to exactly what you're saying with DM Scotty and Easy D6 and other things like DC20 is, look, we're tired of doing all of this, and we just have something that's cut down. You do what you want to do. You let the DM say if you could do it or not, ultimately.
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just rules for make-believe. At the end of the day, it's just rules for make-believe. We don't need super complex
as opposed to a, quote, gaming system.
Yeah.
But the problem is that inevitably there is that pull. So Easy D6 now has a supplement.
It has multiple supplements already.
Yeah. So, the process seems almost inevitable.
Yeah. And again,
because people come back and go, no, I want more. I want this or whatever. And you're like, okay, I don't really want to do this. That's not what we set out to do, but I'm going to do it because you're my peeps, Yeah.
At the same time, again, with DM Scott, we had discussed this, and it's what I like to call a complexity budget. Like, how much stuff can you add to a system before it starts becoming clunky? And with EC6, for example, the rules are very, there are not many rules, so you start off with a very low base level. So if this is too complex, you're starting off from here as opposed to 5e, which is starting off from here. But this growth is going to happen regardless.
Right. But, the thing is, the human mind is renowned for its ability to contain contradictory elements. So one of the things that you want is you don't want, oh my God, all these spell slots and, I go up a level and now I have to make 1,400 choices about what I'm going to do. Okay, fine. Don't do that. Oh, but I want to I want to get a feeling of accomplishment.
And choice, so a feeling of choice as well.
Yeah. And I think that is probably the real question going forward in this hobby is, what is the proper balance between ease of play and having options? So one of the things that quite clearly the new D&D roles do is they have gone back and they've done their market research, they've done their play testing, and they've looked at with all of the things that were sort of thrown at people, excuse me, in the various Tasha or whatever, Tasha or Zenithar or whatever, which ones of those are going to be part of the core rules, right? So they're essentially telling you, okay, we gave you 30 options. We're going to take that down to 15. We've decided which ones are the best for the game. So here you go. They're all there, and now you can buy them. But with very little modification, they are what was introduced in Tasha or Zenithar. Some have changed a lot, but most of them have not changed that much. But it's a great marketing strategy because you can't react to it by saying, "Oh, it's all new. They've changed everything."
Good point.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to hit that balance between the number of options that are acceptable and how does the game flow.
Initially, at least.
And I think every one of these games, whether it's on the non-crunchy end, like Scotty's game, or on the more crunchy end, as D&D is sort of slowly beginning to be, it's somewhere. It's on a sliding bar in between, and it really depends on what the GM and the players want to do. So in that sense, it's much better because you didn't really have much of a choice when TSR first exploded in the 80s and you got Dark Sun and all, and it just was nuts. Right? Now you have multiple choices of what games to play, not just within a game itself.
Yeah, for sure.
So you have a better chance of finding something that fits with you.
Okay, I see that Red Dr. Rain agrees with this. He says you can choose what you want in your game. Do what is most fun for you. Good to see you, Jeff.
Yeah, and you don't have to use all the extra rules and books. And in fact, I think that's the main thing is every time that something comes out, my tendency is I don't want it. I have enough. I'm fine with what I've got. I can work with what I have. If there's something I don't like, I will change it. And not only that, but I sort of invite you to think about it this way. When TSR, well, when Wizards does their market research, puts together, their statistical analysis of what things do, and then decides what's going to go in the rules because of that, we take it on faith that what they're trying to do is what they think is obviously best for them because they have a vested interest, right? But also good for the hobby because they have a vested interest in the hobby as a whole continuing, right? But especially as I didn't want to play the Hasbro card, but let's just say that Hasbro cares about the brand, not about the details of the game.
Fair.
The CEO of Hasbro is actually, I was going to say that he isn't playing D&D, but he does. Oh, but let's say the board of directors of Hasbro probably doesn't play. Do we really care what they think? Especially for those of us who've been playing for a long time? No, I don't have a degree in statistics. I'm not a game designer. So I can't actually tell you why it matters that something is a cantrip instead of first level. And ultimately, if they tried to explain it to me, I wouldn't understand what they said. So does it matter? Do we have to believe anything they say, or can we just relax and do whatever we want?
Yeah, I mean, again, it just boils down to what are your preferred rules for playing make-believe. As far as I'm concerned, that's as complex as the choices.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's coming down to that, and that's one of the things that social media and things like watching Critical Role or whatever else, is it really just comes down to, are you enjoying this? If you're not, don't do it.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know,
It's part of
I
the
mean,
fun.
and the funny, and it's almost on a, like for the streaming shows, it's almost on a session by session basis. You know, I've watched ones where Deborah Ann Wall DM'd, and I thought she was great, and then I watched another one, and again, these are all like professional entertainers playing as well, and what you see is that it ends up feeling kind of artificial because it's so obviously now entertainment, not a game.
But again, if you're watching it purely as entertainment, I mean, like watching Jack Black play is just it's hilarious. So, but again, it's
Yep.
if you see it as entertainment, not as okay, I shall watch this to learn how to play a game.
Yeah. Well, so Karl goes out. What does Karl like? Karl likes historical stuff. So Karl goes out and creates a setting for Easy D6 set in the middle of a huge catastrophe, because that's always fun, right? But he sets it during the 30 Years' War, you know, which killed a third of the population of Germany. Yes, there we go. There's the plug. Okay. So Karl is going to, if Karl runs that, he is going to have a lot of fun, partially because there's not much in the way of him having fun.
Yep.
He knows the material. He doesn't have to like go, damn it, is this the battle where Count Tilly died, or is that the next one? I can't remember.
I do have a chart with the list of the battles and places, so yeah.
That's right. I remember seeing that. Well, that's handy for the players. You know, you want, look, nobody is going to go, oh, Karl, I'm sorry, you got the Battle of Leuchtenwald wrong, you know? But he's going to be a better DM because he knows the material. And he's also going to feel more comfortable changing rules.
Yeah, especially there aren't that many rules to begin with, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. If you create your own system or heavily modify a system and then stick it and then run it in an environment that is of your making largely, you can do anything you want. And you'll have the confidence to, you know, I think to come up with a better gaming experience. So seriously, if you're an engineer, run an engineering game. Run a game that revolves, you know, around technology. Do something like that. I would much prefer to do that than buy a pre-made module and try to modify it to fit, you know, my personality, my temperament, my interests.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
You know, these are individuals playing, whether the GM or the player. And if you try to assuage their needs with something that is tailored to be as general as possible, yeah, you know, it can be fine. You're never going to hit the sweet spot.
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, and again, I mean, if you're not doing it as a profession, game design and so on are kind of like, yeah, again, they can be their own hobby.
Yeah.
If you and your
Yeah.
players enjoy tinkering with rules and stuff, go for it.
Well, it's funny. I think we've all had this experience. What is one of the most boring things to do? Okay, this is my opinion, right? One of the most boring things to do in D&D is to go shopping. I don't like to go shopping in real life. If I did like to go shopping in real life, I'd probably enjoy it in D&D, but I don't. So I don't. So, you know, the emphasis on, well, we want it to be as real as possible. No, I don't want it to be as real as possible. I don't want to park outside a medieval mall and walk a mile to get where I need to. So that is really part of the fantasy, is that you can not only get rid of the negatives, you can accentuate the positive. And like Red Dog Terrain says, making your own system is so hard. Yeah, but you know what? I think the rewards are greater. You know, even if it's just somebody else's that you really looked at and said, no, I want it to do this. This fits me. I think that's a good idea. And I think that the fluidity and the fluency with which you'll DM as a result of that will get through to your players.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going back to expectations for a second, because I've noticed this. I don't know if it's my perception or if it's actually like that, but if you go back to, let's say, more mature players, or okay, let's say old players.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you like playing? I like playing a fighter, I like playing a barbarian, I like playing a bard, whatever. It's always something very defined. If people want to be very fancy, they'll be okay, I like to play a dwarf fighter. If you look at
Mhm.
younger players, or at least some of the most vocal players, and like, okay, what do you play? Well, I'm playing a half Tabaxi, half Dragonborn Storm Sorcerer Barbarian with this prestige class and the other thing. It's like, why? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you better have a DM that's okay with that, I guess. But that's the thing is, like, my oldest son plays that kind. Well, not quite that crazy, but he will. He and his buddies will in their game. It's a totally different game than the ones that I play in, right? And they do things. They do weird stuff, you know, but they enjoy it, and their DM is the same age and enjoys the same stuff. So
So
whatever. But
possibly a
but
gener
he need but he knows he understands that if I'm DMing, that's not what he's going to get.
Okay, so I'm guessing it's a generational thing kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, as long as they're having fun at the table, whatever, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and not necessarily generational, although that's an obvious split. I mean, but there are there are people that really do prefer the narrative part of it versus the combat part of it too. So if all you want to do is fight things, and I've been in campaigns where that's what it was. I mean, one we literally just went north on a road, fought everything that we met, turned around, went south, and fought everything that we met on the road again. Um, if 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 that brings you pleasure, do it. And if if you're DM and all the other players are on board, nothing wrong with that at all. You know, but it does mean that you know crunchiness, especially in combat, is going to be at a higher premium in that kind of game. You know, so a lot of people who were super into combat never left 4E.
Yeah, makes sense because I mean, like at the end of the day, it kind of becomes like a war game where you're only in charge of one figure.
Yeah. Well, it's a return to the roots, right? Gygax
Yeah,
would go,
yeah.
"Yes, that's exactly what it's supposed to be,"
No,
and probably Dave Arneson would say, "Oh no, that's not what it's supposed to be." But
I'm just
um,
thinking your cat must be really confused right now.
actually, no, he's just kind of zonked out here.
Yeah, okay. Because I was wondering, probably going like, why is he calling me all the time? What do you want, human?
No, he doesn't care. He's lying down just like Gary Gygax.
He's being a cat.
Um, exactly. Um, yeah, Mia, just do what you want. I guess ultimately what it kind of comes down to is because it's a group game. As long as you all want the same stuff within a certain, you know, narrowness, anything you do is fine as long as you all agree on where you're headed. And that really has been in my mind the great success of D&D over the years is this didn't exist before then. The ability to get a group of friends together and and engage in a collective endeavor in a game in another world and all be more or less on the same page.
Yeah, kind of like
Um,
a shared hallucination with dice.
yes,
Yep.
exactly. Yes, you could all just plug into each other's brains, and it's interesting because that is actually a very powerful psychological thing. And when I saw Peter Jackson's uh, first trilogy
Hmm.
for the first time, huge part of my brain was engaged in going, yes, that's exactly the way I thought it would look. Yes, that's exactly the way I thought it would look. That's not the way I thought it would look. What the hell is that? You know? Um, and that sort of shared community. People
Hmm.
talk about the D&D community a lot, and it's a very common term. But what does that really mean? I don't know. people are in communities for a variety of different reasons. But the one thing that Tolkien has largely done, and then through the movies, is it's given us a common visual reference for most of the stuff that goes on.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd say it's at this point it's Jackson rather than Tolkien.
Yeah, although again, a lot of it is very, I get a little noodly about some of it, like why after 4,000 years is the mill wheel in wherever it is it Hobbiton? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Why is it undershot? Why isn't it overshot or breast shot? Because surely they could have figured that one out in 4,000. But the look, I would still say the look is great. They spent a lot of time on it, and that's what we now see. And if you go, like a couple weeks ago, I watched the most recent Dungeons and Dragons movie, and it's fun finding references to other stuff in it. But it just goes to show sort of how generic fantasy backgrounds have.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, they're all drawing from the same wood.
Yeah, and it's not a single or a single time period. I mean,
true. Yeah.
Who was it? Grungeon Master did a video on YouTube about it in terms of what it all takes place in medieval, a medieval themed sort of area. But what does that mean? And the answer is it doesn't really mean anything. Somehow there are tall ships in medieval settings. There are guns in medieval settings, although, as we know, guns did exist in the Middle Ages. So, not flintlock pistols, but still. So it's the idea, the visual side of it, I think, is really important because it does actually strengthen the bonds between players in terms of how they see the game. I don't want to see another Peter Jackson trilogy. Although there will be a Peter Jackson television series.
Oh dear.
Sorry. But I think that has really helped in that sense. On the other hand, it's pretty much solidified it. There's no particular reason why fantasy, why technology had to just stop because of magic, or why it always seems to stop at a late medieval phase. Why didn't it stop in classical? I don't know why. Why didn't it stop in the Stone Age? We discovered magic, so don't worry about discovering fire.
That would be pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, that aside, for example, thinking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for example, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe someone who's more familiar with Lord of the Rings or read it more recently can correct me, but if I'm not mistaken, in the books, dwarven architecture and dwarven designs were far more organic.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to what we get in the movies, which are like chunky, octagonal, and very sharp edged.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of a production designer.
Mm-hmm.
The dwarves look like their architecture. Their architecture looks like the dwarves. When you're dealing in archetypes, it's what you want to do.
Not complaining because it looks amazing. It's just that I just find it interesting that that's literally overtaken how if I talk to any fantasy fan, that's how they picture dwarves.
That's how it is.
Yeah.
Well, Dungeon Matron said, look, dwarves who speak with Scottish accents.
Yeah.
I don't remember dwarves speaking with Scottish accents before that. I mean, it's made worse by the fact that the guy who's playing the dwarf with a Scottish accent is actually Welsh. So he's clearly a traitor against the Celtic peoples. But this is the way the archetypes develop over the years. Again, this is no different, for example, from, again, the split between elves and dwarves, and the elves being magic-y and the dwarves being crap.
To tell you the truth, I think the first place I ever heard of dwarves having kind of Scottish accents was in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay kind of setting. Mm-hmm. And I found out last year that it's not supposed to be Scottish; it's supposed to be Yorkshire accent.
Well,
So
You know,
that's the
a
weird
lot
thing.
of there were times when Scotland extended down there.
Fair enough. Yeah, but
You know,
if, it's kind of funny if that's if
it's a
down.
northern English dialect,
Yeah, fair enough.
right?
But
Yeah,
I would find it interesting if that's how we got dwarves with Scottish accents in Lord of the Rings in a very roundabout
yeah,
kind of way.
yeah. They don't seem to eat black pudding though, or anything like that. So I don't know. They're clearly not Yorkshire. But yeah, I mean those types of personalities help us grab onto something. They're a great boon to players. Although again, now everybody plays a dwarf with a Scottish accent. Um, by the way, part of that is because the other Celtic accents are harder to say or harder to stay in.
Hmm. All right.
That's because linguistically speaking, Scots is much closer to English than so you can speak with a Scots accent in Scots, which is an English dialect or language if you're Scottish. Um, but if you're actually a Gaelic speaker, it sounds completely different, and it's hard because Gaelic is not related to any of the Germanic languages. It's hard for English speakers to replicate a Gaelic accent.
All right.
It is much easier to do essentially a parody of Scots, which is descended from Old English.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it goes back to the whole familiarity of the language and the names and stuff like that. And people have been going back and forth across that Scottish English border, and the border itself has moved so many times that in a lot of ways, you know, a Yorkshire accent is more similar to a Scots accent than it is certainly to a West Country Somerset accent or the Southeast or a London
Yeah, that
accent.
makes sense. All right.
So that's I mean that's one good reason to do them. I suppose in Scottish is you can do it. You want it to be accessible.
Okay, so quick question. Is there any pop culture trope which infiltrated gaming that you find either really surprising or really annoying?
Um,
If there's anyone in the chat who has any particular feelings about those, just drop them in the
yeah,
chat as
that's
well.
there are things I think that probably hit each one of us, and you're like, why are we doing this again? Or why is this even in here? Yeah, probably the one that I think about not as often as I think about the Roman Empire, but probably the one that I think about the most is the half timbered houses,
Okay.
just because nobody lived in a half timbered house really until about 1450. So
Waterlando,
you
baby.
know, but again, it's I mean you can find half timbered houses from before them, but I mean we're talking about like 10 of them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but in 1450, for God's sakes, the Renaissance has been going for a century. So at least there we're officially out of the Middle Ages. But the idea that everybody had houses like that is just nuts. You know. Also, they don't have chimneys. Chimneys weren't invented yet. So,
Oh, yeah,
but
that's a
but
good
on the
point.
other hand, from a crafting point of view, there's nothing better. You can make a half timbered house and make it look really good, and it works, and it looks exactly like Three, for example, in the movies.
Yeah.
So you know, I it's the historian in me that doesn't like them, but I understand the utility of it.
No, I mean, speaking for myself, I really like the look of half-timbered houses, but also as a crafter, there's a sneaky thing because they're made in distinct segments. You've got clear dividing lines. You can cobble any amount of
Yeah.
material, and you have clear joints where you can hide the seams, which as a crafter I just find absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah, no, I mean there's advantages to it. Let's put it that way. Pulling it out of its actual environment, it can work for you. It just not historic. Um, let's see. Yes, but half timber houses are so pretty. I can tell you, having been in a lot of them, they are pretty on the outside, and when you go in, The kitchen is about 3.5 foot wide. You will die coming down the stairs. And there is probably no bathroom. Or if there
There
is,
is
you can't
almost
find it.
certainly no bathroom.
Yeah, you can't find it. If they've managed to get one shoehorned in somewhere, you can't find it. You're going to have to get a map. But they are. Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, so the dungeon maiden threw in wearing armor 24/7.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, if you watch, I'm stealing this from something else I watched the other day. I think the Dan Snow. He was complaining about in Braveheart, and there's a million things to complain about in Braveheart, but they wear full armor all the time. I no idea how children are conceived. You know, it's just ridiculous. I swear they wear it in battle, great. They wear it in council meetings. Why? You think your fellow counselors sitting in front of the king are going to try to kill you? You know, it's ridiculous. And also, you know, as anybody who's ever played around with it, it takes forever to put on and take off. You know, you need help. You can't do it by yourself. So it is just really.
Yeah, plus you have to clean it at some point, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so-
yeah. It's not. It doesn't smell good. I mean, you
Yeah.
do wear, you know, linen surcoat or something like that. So
Okay.
glass windows, yeah, that's a problem. But again, you either get it. It would either be really thin sheets of board, or as you say, oiled paper. But again, for the
If you had
vast
windows at all,
majority of
yeah.
people, yeah, for the vast majority of people, no, you got nothing. You might have shutters, but there's not going to be anything in your window opening. So they're going to be small. And your house is going to be made out of sticks and mud.
And poop.
Well, that's necessary, you know. It's a good binding agent.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric Clemens says that never stopped Tutoring Excalibur.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, Excalibur. Those are. I love the movie, but man, that is. I mean, everybody must have just stopped every 5 minutes and had 100 people come and polish their armor. You know?
Okay, and Mia is saying Tom is going to love my wagon for the build challenging.
Oh, is that? Did I see that? Was that on last week?
Not yet, but
It looked kind of like a gypsy wagon.
kind of like the gypsy wagon, but it's a half
Yeah. No, that was
building.
good. That was good. I like the color. It actually looked more like an Irish gypsy caravan. That was good.
Okay, speaking of the challenge, I'd just like to remind everyone that we'll be picking up where we left off next week. So hopefully there will be no interruptions there. Okay, and speaking personally, I think one of the things that really gets on my nerves most is the ye old magic item shop.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate everything about it. Yeah. But outside of the fact that it was never called Ye Olde Magic Copy, it just boggles my mind that there's a magic shop on, you know, it's like a Starbucks apparently.
Yeah, it's just kind of. It's even weirder because if you think about it, if there's a shop selling magic, let's say magic swords, legally on the street,
Mhm.
at prices that are commonly available, how come the army or the city guard aren't equipping everyone with magic swords?
Right. Or just to flip it, why don't the local criminals just crash the shop and steal everything? You know, no, it makes no sense. It's handy within the game. I get that. But again, this is one of the decisions you make as a GM. Is there going to be a lot of magic? Is there going to be a little magic? You know, but also it again leads into questions like, okay, healing potions are pretty simple to make, one assumes, right? But you still, you know, is there some? I mean, based on the number of healing potions floating around, somewhere there is a giant factory with a conveyor belt and a bunch of, I don't know, first level magic users just sitting there, just doing nothing all day, except making healing potions.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Fantasy Taiwan or Fantasy China or something like that.
Yes. Oh, campaign terrain? Yes.
Yes.
Boy. Play Skyrim sometime. You know, ancient
Oh
tombs.
God,
Nobody's
yeah.
been in there for thousands of years. Everything is lit. The torches on the wall are lit.
And you
The
open
the
and you open a chest
pedestals are lit.
and you open a chest and
Oh,
you find fresh fruit.
yes. Like wow, wow, that sweet roll. It still looks good after several thousand years. Um, must be high in preservatives.
It's
But
magic.
yeah, that's yeah. Well, and again, to be fair, sometimes like no, I don't think I would ever say that torches are lit, but sometimes if you end up with a party that somehow has nobody dark vision, maybe you cut them a break and just kind of like don't mention things, don't mention that.
Yeah.
It's child labor to make potions. That would be good. Why not?
I mean, it's
You
a
know,
good world
small
building thing. Yeah.
hand, yeah, small hands, small, small portions of ingredients. Why not? Sure.
Then,
So I did,
but since it's a fantasy world, why don't we kick it up a notch and make it gnome labor to make potions?
yeah, why not? They have nothing better to do. They're well, they like to tinker, right? So why don't they just make potions all day?
Yeah, or
Um,
clocks or whatever. Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, they're
Which
perfect.
actually it brings on a different level of terrible because what if you have gnome child labor?
Then they're really small, huh?
Yeah,
Wow, that would be. I don't know how short is a gnome child.
I have no idea. I'm
Yeah,
I'm, I'm pretty sure it's
I
in a
mean
rule
we're
book somewhere.
yeah, like come up to your knee, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be tough. That would be really tough. Um, again about the food, but this food, like in Skyrim, the food's just sitting out on a table in a dungeon. You know. So first of all, none of the scavengers have gotten it, right?
Yeah.
There's no little rat bites on it or anything, and it's 1,000 years old. So yeah, it's very strange. Um, pocket babies, yeah. Well, that would be, hey, take your yes, take your daughter to work day. Okay, I'll just put her in my pocket. And here we go. So
Okay.
anyway, I get, is there a takeaway from this? No, you do what you want, whatever works. You know,
So
don't
yeah,
buy
just
everything that Wizards of the Coast puts out because you're just making them richer. So unless you own Hasbro stock, it's not going to do you a bit of good.
yeah, it was. I mean, throw things together, have fun.
Yeah.
If things don't make perfect sense, yeah, it's fine. You'll probably annoy someone, but
Yeah. I mean, and I guess it does tend to point out how important it is to communicate with your players. You don't want to be the only person at the table having fun.
at the same time, you don't want to be the only person at the table not having fun.
That's true too. I mean, I guess. I mean, the thing is that the GM is a player as well. He
Yeah.
just has a specialized function. You know, he's not there for his health. He's there to have fun, just like everybody else. So, um, it just again, it sort of feels like there's too many options available now. This is the cranky old guy speaking. There's too many options. They all need to get off my lawn. Um, but I've never actually played. Well, I sort of played a little test thing of EZD6, but I enjoyed it mostly because I didn't have to, in a way, think as hard. But in a way, I had to think harder because I had to be more creative, as opposed to just relying on stats.
Yeah, if you have no options on the menu, then it's you have to pull something out of your pocket.
Yeah, and I know of a couple of people who play D&D and enjoy it a lot, but probably would enjoy EZD6 more because I'm trying to figure out a nice way of saying this. Because the rules aren't as important to them.
Good.
Doing something is.
I mean, different schools of thought.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we also found out that if we want to really annoy you, we can have a city that's full of half-timbered houses with glass windows and chimneys, and have it fully peopled by people wearing full plate armor.
That would be a great version of a funhouse dungeon. Just everything that tweaks anybody. Just put them in there. People walking around clanking all the time, just banging into each other on the streets because their visors are down and they can't see where they're going. You know, Healing potions raining from the skies,
Tiny healing potions.
that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah, little tiny healing potions, a little ribbon tied around them. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Okay, right. Okay, I see that Eric is dropping off as well, and we are definitely going to wrap this up soon. Tom, this was so much fun.
Well, I mean, these are great because it's again the community aspect of it is important. We all have our own experiences. We all bring something different to the table, so it's a good thing.
Okay, so Tom, I'll let you go because I think you have a game in 30 minutes as well.
I have a game in 30 minutes too.
Okay, let me give you some time to prepare, and thanks again for being here. Thanks everyone for
Okay.
watching, and remember we'll be back with the crafting challenge today week. So everyone, have a great week, and thanks for watching. Oops, click that too soon. Bye.